Welcome to Heavy Networking. In today's show, we're catching up with sponsor Selector.ai and putting meat onto the bones of Model Context Protocol, all the rage in the land of AI. Our guest is John Capobianco. I'm Ethan Banks along with Drew Conway Murray. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Blue Sky, and please do. Heavy Networking is part of the Packet Pushers growing network of fine podcasts for your professional career development. Subscribe anywhere that you get your podcasts, including YouTube, and join our community Slack to chat about the shows with other networking enthusiasts. John, welcome back to Heavy Networking, man. You are a several-time guest, and you always seem to be working on something really interesting that I can't seem to find the time to get to. And we're going to talk about Model Context Protocol that you've done some videos and some work on that. But before we get there, I need you to catch us up on Selector. You guys were on the show last November 2024, and I know a bunch of people called you guys and checked in on things. They were very interested in the product, and you've been iterating since. Would you catch us up on what else you've done since November? And here we are recording in April.
Yeah, no, things have been just on fire for us. We've gained a lot of momentum, the exposure from my last appearance. We had a wonderful presence at Tech Field Day recently, which generated a lot of interest as well. We're doing some incredible stuff with DVR tends to get a lot of attention, the ability to look back in time. And one of the more popular demos or features our customers finding is actually looking at path traces in a maps-like view. So I can say, what was how did this router in Atlanta get to Google 8.8.8 across North America last Friday? And then show me the path it took Wednesday and Monday. And what's my intent? Where should that traffic be going? During an incident or an outage, where was traffic reflected to when we had a fiber cut? Did it fail over to the right path? Troubleshooting, right? An hour ago, there was a change. Could you show me the impact? So both visually and through natural language and a mix of the two. So that's really, really catching on. Our Copilot has gotten even better. We're finding multilingual usage of it. So we've had a customer wanting to interface with their technology in Greek. Now, Greek is not necessarily a simple language to translate. And they're actually able to ask questions in Greek and get answers back in Greek. And it's been a lot less friction for them. And then I guess finally, we're finding customers now who've established trust, we've established trust with our root cause analysis. And they want to go further. You've identified some problem. It seems like low-hanging fruit. It's relatively low risk for us to just automate, let's say, shutting a port if there's a cut or a change, or implementing our intent from a source of truth, even not configuration related stuff, but open up a ServiceNow ticket automatically through an agent, send emails, send calendar alerts. When you predict a maintenance window, put it right in people's calendar agentically. So really exciting stuff at Selector. And then most recently, leading up to our discussion today, in the last few months, there's a new protocol that's come out for artificial intelligence agents and tools. And we've had some customers expressing interest in MCP for Selector, which we have a very early working prototype of that's actually out in a few customers' hands being trialed.
Okay, before we get to MCP, because that is going to be the bulk of our conversation, you said about 6 things that were pretty interesting there. You said network DVR. So as in digital video recorder, I can go back in time and look at things. And you gave this very interesting example. I can see how we got from Atlanta to 8.8.8.8 on Monday versus Wednesday versus Friday, which was really intriguing in that 8.8.8, that's Anycast, how that address works. It can be announced from various places, and how you converge to get to the closest 8.8.8.8 to you will change over time. And plus you gave the example of an infrastructure cut, a fiber cut. So you're telling me end-to-end path, I can see all of that?
Visually, and then it's all interactive. So you can click on a node and it will show you the PE router, the interface that's connected, its neighbor interface, the full chain across North America. in a few different ways, as a visual dashboard, as JSON, as a list showing you the full path. And then yes, and I picked a router to the Google. If you're an MPLS provider, it could be two MPLS links, and you put your customer color or customer tag in there. It could just be two arbitrary routers in your infrastructure. How are they getting to each other at any point in time? And how does that shift over time? And you can literally hit play and watch the time scale move along and watch the traffic converge and move and go different directions.
Mm. You also talked about Copilot. Now that refresh our memory on what that feature does with Selector.
So Copilot lets you in a natural language, either within the platform through the dashboard or through the GUI, right? Or from Slack or Teams or WebEx or Zoom or something. You can invoke this Copilot and ask it natural language questions. Device health for Atlanta, device health for Spine 3, unhealthy interfaces on Leaf 125, just in natural language. But it doesn't have to be that strict. Because of the semantic searching, you could have a more natural language. Good morning, how is the health of my network in Atlanta? Right? It doesn't have to be robotic. SQL like matching will parse that out. So just being able to have a natural conversation and drive through your GUIs in conversational interfaces. Now we have two REST APIs answering this. One is a dashboard view, and one is the natural language view. So you get some visual representation of the situation, and then an LLM explaining it. Now, what's interesting is this is built on a network language model, which we're fine tuning a bring your own model approach. We're finding customers are gravitating towards Google Gemini, which makes sense, right? They have email in the cloud, they've got calendar in the cloud. Why not sign up for the Google Cloud LLM service?
If you're a Google for Business customer, I am at Packet Pushers, you get Gemini. That's part of it. Yeah.
Right. And you don't have concerns about the data you're sending it, right?
No, I know Google's already reading it all. It's great.
Well, for those reasons, we're finding customers are using that as the anchor LLM in the Copilot experience, which leads to advanced reasoning, chain of thought, tool calling, lots of great stuff within the Copilot that we're fine tuning to understand SQL and to understand your network environment.
So you also mentioned root cause analysis, and that's sort of been like, in some ways, the holy grail of like network monitoring or network management systems. But it's typically like, here's a box of alerts that I dump on a table like a bunch of puzzle pieces, and it's up to network engineers to put it together. Can you talk about what you're doing with your root cause analysis to make it less of a giant assembly task?
That's a great point, Drew. So we bring in all those metrics, which are numbers, and since we're bringing in the numbers, we can do natural baselining against a time scale, and then we're also bringing in words, typically in the form of logs, that we're doing named entity recognition. So when we have anomalies, right, we throw away all the good stuff and we're focusing on the anomalies, anything above those baselines, or any named entity recognition that jumps out as error or an AS number or an IP address. There's a lot of things we can extract. We actually cluster similar things based on metadata and attributes. So they form natural clusters, which then we can draw the correlations from to identify down to a root cause. So an interesting one might be a user, the root cause, right? The real cause is that user Ethan shut down bundle 2 on router 5. That caused 5 other routers to lose BGP, which caused 50 OSPF events and 40 ISIS events and a bunch of BFD events and on and on and on, right? So we'll say, here's the actual root cause, that change that the user made, and here is the triggered events or subsequent alarms caused by that root cause. Now, what's interesting is right away there's a natural distrust, and I don't hold that against anyone. When they get this root cause, show me your work. How did you come to this root cause, right? So we have a correlation, we call it a knowledge graph, that has a sliding scale of coupling. So if you want more or less coupling of the correlated root cause analysis, you can put more or less lines on the correlation, but it will step you through that exact situation that I mentioned, with the change being at the root and then all of the spawned correlated events. So we can actually show our work. It's not like You just have to take our word for it. We're going to give you the alert, and then the ability to interrogate and subjectively look at the root cause.
Okay.
But over time, over a few weeks, or over, once we establish trust, people look less and less at that knowledge graph and just start to act upon the root cause analysis. Smart alert, let's say.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you have demonstrated trust, then yeah, you could move on from that.
Well, John, let's move into model context protocol. I watched a video that you published on YouTube that, if I could, there was one big takeaway. It was, guys, don't sleep on this. I think that's more or less a quote that you said. You said maybe you slept on RAG and some other AI advancements, but don't sleep on model context protocol. Well, let's start here, John. Explain MCP to us, explain like I'm 5.
Sure. So as a 5-year-old, maybe you understand a USB stick, a little thumb drive that you plug into your laptop or computer. And that thumb drive doesn't need to be programmed or configured, or you don't have to do anything at all. You plug it in and you have access to the things on that thumb drive, right?
So and the malware loads. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and the malware loads. Right. Well, actually, it's funny. Much like a USB that you don't, if you find one in the parking lot, you probably do not want to plug that into the corporate laptop, right?
Right.
So if you find an MCP server in the wild out there on the internet, you may not want to just plug it into your corporate laptop, right? It's a very good analogy. But I like to focus on the key, the protocol. Now, I think the broadest appeal to this, the heavy networking, are the networking folks. Think of this like DHCP in a way. Think of it as OSPF or BGP in a way, in that it's a client server architecture. Think file transfer protocol. Think hypertext transfer protocol, right? We're going to have a server, Apache IIS, hosting the server, and a client that reads the HTML pages from any device anywhere in the world, right? Like that's universal.
The protocol is governing the transfer of data in whatever format it is. FTP's got its rules, HTTP has its rules, and MCP, that's the point you're making here. MCP is a protocol with rules.
It's a protocol about standards and rules. Now, for the past 3 years, I've been developing agents and things and stuff. Wild West, no guidance, nothing, no driving principles, no way to make it connect with your agent and your tools. You do it
I've been
John's
thinking
way.
He was a mad scientist, and now you said Wild West, and I have to think he was a cowboy. I guess I can be okay with that.
Well,
yeah,
even in the science world, right? Unless there's if the Food and Drug Administration survives, right? Unless there's a governing body that has protocols and standards on how to make the chemistry to make those pills, you end up with bad pills, right? Like I would argue that protocols drive not just the networking industry, but the world at large, right? Planes fly in the sky for a reason, right?
Yeah. Don't take the pill you found in the parking lot either.
Right. Don't take the pill you found in the parking lot. So let's take DHCP, for example. Okay. So we have a server that has a pool of addresses, and a client discovers those addresses and then ultimately requests one and is offered one. In a similar way, let's take a Selector MCP server, okay? It has, let's say, an Ask Selector tool that lets you ask Selector things in natural language. When your client discovers the MCP, it actually discovers that tool. Oh, I've connected the Selector MCP to my client. Here's the tools it has, and here's the structure of the data that I need to send it. Now, it sounds like REST API, kind of, and it is sort of, kind of. But if we think about REST API, we need to post with a body and a structure and a JSON payload and maybe authentication and headers. There's some friction there. To use a tool from an MCP server, it's natural language, meaning I can ask in my MCP client, how is the health of spine 3? Ask Selector, or ask Selector the health of spine 3. The tool will be discovered and invoked all through natural language. I don't have to worry about anything else at all.
And the server is the key piece here, in that it's, I from the research I did getting ready for this show, John, I understood it to be an abstraction layer. It is going to take that query inbound and translate it to whatever it needs to be. You can have a bunch of different servers on the back. You said it's kind of like an API. Well, actually, an API could be sitting on the backside of that
Yes.
MCP server. Yeah.
Yes. And yes, those tools. So that MCP server could be a simple abstraction layer or proxy, however you want to think about it, to REST APIs. That's a very valid use case. And now instead of publishing a Swagger document, I publish an MCP server that you discover how to use the tools. So example, GitHub, like this is not, in the corners or hidden away. We have major players like AWS, Google, Microsoft, GitHub, on and on and on, releasing MCPs. So let's say I want to do version and source control. I plug in the GitHub MCP server, and now I can create files, create branches, merge code, pull code, whatever, through natural language. Here's I could type in, here's my proposed configuration. Could you check this into GitHub for me, please? That's all I need to do. I don't need to write the code to make a post or do anything, nothing.
To dive into your discovery concept a little more, my MCP client is going to, part of the protocol is to get back a description. Like you said, instead of a Swagger document, I'm going to get back a description of what the server is offering, what the different tools are that are sitting back there,
Right.
and give us things about structure and format, I think, too.
Yeah. So it's a doc string, Ethan. It's all based on typing and doc strings. The description gets detected on how exactly to use this tool you've discovered. And now when we talk about clients, maybe to make this less abstract, VS Code is now an MCP client. They've added the MCP capability to VS Code. Claude Desktop.
So, okay, I don't have to have the client invoked in code myself. I can lean into my IDE, VS Code in this example, to be the client.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you know how we've been adding extensions in VS Code for a long time?
Yeah.
You could just add a Markdown extension or a Jinja extension or a Python extension or whatever that lets your IDE interpret Python code easier and give it color coding or whatever. It's the exact same thing, except now you're plugging in the GitHub MCP or the Selector MCP, and now it's plugged in. Please check this code into GitHub. Enter. Boom, it's checked into GitHub through the MCP. So, or you could write your own clients, right? You could write your own code. I do that in LangGraph, and I make a graph that has an assistant with access to tools, and those tools are all discovered through MCPs. So I'm up to, call it 10 MCPs and call it 65 tools. 65 individual tools: create an email, send a Slack message, make an Excala draw.
You're saying MCPs. Do you mean MCP servers?
MCP servers. So my client that I've written is connecting to approximately 10 MCP servers, each of which has 4 to 10 tools individually. So now my code has become a super code, right? I'm writing some application and I want it to be able to do email. I used to have to write that code, right? Well, now I just connect to the MCP and say, use this tool when you want to send email.
Or in Python, I would lean into a library that would give me those capabilities. Yeah.
Correct.
So when I was reading up on MCP for this, the way I tried to think about it is, and John, let me know if I'm on the right track or not. We're moving into a world of agentic AI where there are agents that are going to go out and do functions. And for the agent to accomplish that function, it might have to talk to, cloud service A, database B, a local file C, or whatever. And the model context protocol is meant to streamline or to standardize the communications among all of those different services that an agent might need to work with.
Exactly. So here's interesting. As you start to scale these things, you might think to yourself, that sounds complicated to make an application that can send email and send to Slack and to send things to GitHub. Like, are you handling all this as individual use cases or code or functions? No, the protocol is facilitating the interaction between all of these tools. So when I have a complex prompt that's asking it to do 4 or 5 things, the LLM is invoking the 4 or 5 tools that it needs to, and all of the communication is unified. It's all natural language, the response. I'm not having to parse things or do any regular expression of any kind or dealing with JSON payloads. None of that. It's all streamlined into natural language. So you guys have heard of vibe coding, right? Right? This new
Yep.
trend of vibe coding. And it's coming with its own set of not rules, but just practices in the way people are vibe coding. Like I was reading that troubleshooting is dead. Troubleshooting is dead. You just get a whole fresh copy of the function. So instead of saying, here's my error and here's the line and I'm troubleshooting this, and you just give it the whole chunk of code and say, this isn't working. Can you give me a working version? Right. And you just wholesale replace that function with a whole new function. Right. So I'm saying vibe ops. We had DevOps, we had net DevOps, we had AI ops. Now we're having vibe ops. Hey man, how's the health of router 2? Hey, could you add a loop back to router 4? Could you turn this into OSPF? I'm getting some weird latency problem over here. What's going on? You just vibe ops, man. You don't have to memorize show commands. You don't have to pass your CCN whatever. You don't have to, like you just vibe it out, guys.
We're all the dude now, is what I'm
We're
hearing.
all the dude now, right? So it's us with our new colleague, the LLM, who we've equipped with a bunch of tools, and we work together to accomplish goals.
So you mentioned that MCP is built around a client-server architecture. And when I think of that sort of in the traditional way, that's some pretty heavy code. Is that what's being mimicked here, or what are the differences?
No, it's actually, so to write an MCP server, it's more or less. So what's interesting, Drew, is that there's frameworks. So there's a fast MCP Python library framework that abstracts away all of this. There's even from model context protocol.io, a schematic you can use to transform and say an API into an MCP. All of this is well thought out. All of it's well documented and quite easy to do. What's interesting, I was just reading yesterday, the first remote MCP was offered on the web. Now, let's just consider this for a second. Let's say I come up with an extremely good calculation MCP. It just does math really well. Well, I put that on the web and I'm start charging access to that MCP. And when people need a great math function in their tool, they can now make remote calls over the World Wide Web to my MCP server in the cloud that gives it access to the tools that it needs. Now, think of that at scale. Think of that with thousands or tens of thousands or millions of MCP servers and tools. And we just start plugging them in, right?
With MCP, the client and the server could also live on the same machine, yes?
They could. And guys, we've actually started to see the evolution in terms of protocols and under the hood. So my MCPs use STDIO, standard input output. There's no open ports. Okay, so this is not like a REST API where I have to listen on 8,000 or listen on port 80 and expose my MCP to the world. It's internal on the back plane through standard studio is what people are calling it, standard input output, or SSE, server-side execution. Now, the payloads are all RPC JSON 2.0. So we're moving further. Things are actually progressing. And some of those things that you studied in school that you never really saw come to life, remote procedure call JSON, are, we read about it a little bit, but it just never really materialized. We're seeing a lot of these new protocols, and it's all asynchronous, guys. There's no synchronicity. There's no blocking of functions. Everything should be asynchronous. So when I call that tool off wherever that tool is running, my code just keeps working. And whenever I get the tool's response, I get the tool's response, meaning we can run parallel tool calls. If I have 60 tools and it takes 10 of those 60 to get a particular thing achieved, those 10 tools can all run asynchronously independently and then come back together with the answer to the LLM.
Well, let's get practical with this, John. If let's say we understand the basics of MCP architecture at this point, client server, it's an abstraction layer, you can advertise functions, there's going to be a discovery process and so on. All right, I'll bake this into my code. From a network operations perspective, what are you seeing? What are you thinking about that MCP is going to be useful for?
Right. So when I had time and after I had figured out enough of it to be dangerous, I made a Cisco PyETS MCP server. Now, this MCP server's tools are things like run show command, execute configuration command, execute Linux command, execute show run, execute show logging. So those 5 tools make up this MCP server. The client discovers the tools, and I volume mount a testbed file. So now my container has the testbed for the network topology and how to connect to devices and stuff.
So now the LLM knows that it's basically got the model of the network, so it understands the infrastructure that's there, router, switches, whatever you've got in there. Okay.
Right. And it has access to these tools. So then I can say something. So here's a real thing that I've done. It's on YouTube. The Cisco Modeling Lab, when you do a DevNet sandbox reservation for CML, it comes with a half broken, half configured thing. It's like a router on a switch, kind of, but not really fully configured. So you get two PCs, two Linux PCs, a switch connecting them on two different VLANs and a router, a classic router on a stick, but it's all broken. I said to the LLM, using the tools you have access to, could you get PC1 and PC2 working using these IP addresses? A little bit more than that, but not much more than that. My client discovers, oh, I have access to a show running config tool. I'm going to run that and learn the config. And then I have access to a configure Cisco devices tool.
You don't have to tell it which of the tools to use, you're saying.
No.
It infers it from your initial prompt.
It infers it through the initial prompt, exactly.
So the whole front end of this is an LLM, essentially.
And an LLM is bound to those tools.
Okay.
So all of this was done using Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT. The LLM, I don't want to say is immaterial, but you can use, it's a la carte.
You just bridged a great chasm, but what you just said was a key thing I was missing, John. When you were describing the discovery process, here's all the tools that this MCP server learns. It's like, okay, so now my code will know the structure to make the, almost like GraphQL or something. Like here's a bunch of things that that you can ask me. But instead, it's more like your code now understands that these are resources. You don't have to know that. You don't.
No.
It doesn't sound like you don't even have to code that.
No, you don't. That's the neat thing. So during my you learn things at different ways, and mine is to try to really build things and learn it. And it's funny because it worked. And then I looked at it and I asked some people, and they're like, well, it works, but it's not right. Meaning I was discovering the tools and then I was handwriting all of the mappings myself. Call this tool when you want to do this.
Which would have been my natural assumption too. Exactly that. Yeah.
and then through my vibe coding, ChatGPT's like, John, you're kind of close, but think about this as a protocol. Why are you mapping these tools? You've discovered them. You know their doc strings. The LLM now will pick the tool that it needs based on this human description. So when you say, I want you to configure IPs on a Linux host, the LLM naturally says, oh, there's a configure Linux host tool. I'm going to use that.
Okay, you like I said, you bridged a big gap in my knowledge. Now my brain is spinning, and I think I'm having a heart attack. I'm not sure.
It's absolutely it is so fun. It really brings a level of excitement and enjoyment to your coding. And think about plugging these. Like imagine being able to drive. You were sort of getting at like the ultimate thing in operations. Imagine running your network through VS Code or through an IDE or through a natural language. Now we're not there yet, but my hope is that this doesn't become a VHS Betamax thing or a Blu-ray HD DVD thing, right? I hope everyone gets involved, and I hope to see large vendor X have MCPs and large vendor Y have MCPs. And then us as consumers or other solution providers can start to plug these USB keys in together, right?
So, well, but MCP is a bit, to call it immature or nascent. I mean, those are understatements. This thing was just announced by, it was OpenAI, right? That announced this?
Anthropic.
Anthropic. Right, okay. Announced this in November 24, and
yes.
Here we are about 5 months later talking about this. And
yes.
So, I mean, basic functionality not here, like authentication, as I understand it, is not part of MCP yet.
I haven't seen much authentication. Now, the other neat thing is,
he says casually.
I know, I say casually. The other thing is, I have seen some pretty, scary stories. And much like the USB on the parking lot, right? Don't just plug in a USB you find on GitHub into your solution. Do some due diligence. Not to avoid the question, but just something to think about. There are a few of us, not just me. There's actually several people really trying to tackle this protocol and implement it with network automation, Dwan Lightfoot being one of them from AWS.
Yeah.
He made a very good point to me. He said, he kind of, don't be so hard on yourself, John. You're doing this just as a human right now. And what he means by that is that MCPs came out, call it December 2024. Our large language models that we're using to try and develop against MCP don't know about it yet. They haven't learned anything about it yet. ChatGPT 4 doesn't know a single thing about MCP. If you ask what's MCP, it will give you a totally different, incorrect acronym, meaning I
Because their
can't
knowledge
vibe
base
code.
ends whenever the last time was it was trained,
Right,
and it tends to
right.
be many months or years even behind.
Right. So it's up to just humans collaborating with other humans right now. Here's how I'm trying to do MCPs. How are you doing MCPs? Right. It's word of mouth. It's old school right now. There's no real vibe coding because you can't, like Claude knows a little bit about it from Anthropic, but it's going to be months before you can just say to an LLM, here's my REST API. Could you give me an MCP server for it? But that day is only a few months away, right?
So who do you see as being, builders or designers of MCP versus being consumers of MCP? And I guess I'm thinking, where would network engineers fit in this, distinction?
I think they're going to be consumers. I think that there's going to be, let's call it Nornir. I think there is a Nornir MCP out there, or my PyETS one, or Netbox has one, Nautobot has one, F5 is working on one, right? More and more, like you're going to wake up and go, holy cow, like where did all these tools come from? You know what I mean? Like everyone is going to participate in this, I think, and have them. Now, if you wanted to write your own, I think it's more about finding approvals and starting to socialize this with management. There's this thing called MCPs. How do we use this responsibly? How do we adjust our policies to incorporate them? How do we vet them? How do we secure them? There's a long road ahead before this becomes widely available in the enterprise, right?
Mm-hmm.
But university level, individual contributors, people just like myself working on their own, I think there's a big market there. I would sort of tend to agree with Dwan's assessment that this is going to lead to a whole new boom of successful millionaires and entrepreneurs. It really is. If you can imagine like email clients and how many different iterations there's been of, let's just take Outlook and Exchange. How much did those two things make Microsoft in the last 35 years? Hundreds of millions of dollars. All right. And all that was an interpretation of SMTP, right? So when others organizations start to give their own interpretations of MCP, we could see things like the new Outlook, right?
Okay, but hype machine off for
Yes.
just a minute here. We know LLMs have some fundamental challenges for things like network operations where you can't afford for anything to be wrong. And so within the world of LLMs, hallucinations are common. It can authoritatively give you a wrong answer. Not that it's a high percentage, but in something like networking, any incorrect answer could be significant or cause an outage. There's a trust problem that network engineers have here, and
Right.
rightfully so.
Right.
Now, MCPs are leaning into, are a part of the LLM ecosystem as you've described them, as I'm understanding them. So I'm still assuming hallucinations are a challenge. Is there anything within the MCP world that changes that or helps us that, or we should be thinking differently about that problem?
So I think the MCP is part of the solution for this. If we think of retrieval augmented generation, this is that, but on steroids, right? So with RAG, I needed to go to the source, put it in a vector store, make the vector store available to the LLM. Whereas now I'm saying, here, I think this is more practical. AWS, people do networking in AWS, right? Like there are people that use AWS cloud for networking, right? There's a whole suite of AWS MCPs now that are available today. So that whole trust business, what if your LLM had direct access to the AWS knowledge base and every article and every word in every article and could interpret it correctly from AWS? That is capable today. I plug in the AWS knowledge base MCP into my network automation solution, and now it never gets it wrong because it's got an authoritative source called the AWS knowledge base. Now, to my point of an ecosystem, what if Cisco's TAC or Cisco.com or Juniper.com or Arista.com or their individual knowledge bases all had MCP front ends, where your MCP tool could look into a knowledge base and determine the right commands without hallucinations, right from the source, right from Cisco's doc, right?
So,
All we
and
need right now is, instead of the REST API to docs.cisco.com, we need an MCP for docs.cisco.com, right?
the idea being that this would serve, like Cisco sets up essentially, I'm trying to think in the MCP protocol model here. On the Cisco end, it would be an MCP server front
Yep.
ending of the Cisco knowledge base. I use an MCP client front ended by an LLM to say, how do I do XYZ on this platform, on this Cisco router? The client reaches out to the server, gets the information from the knowledge base, brings it back to me.
Exactly. Exactly. And then the next step could be you invoke the PyETS tool to go ahead to the router and push the config
From the same interface.
from the same interface. Yeah.
Yeah.
It wouldn't even need to bring the knowledge back to me so much as use the knowledge itself.
Use the knowledge itself to guide your next context window. That's right. Dear, dear LLM, I have router 1, router 2 that right now are using static routes. I'd like you to switch them to EIGRP. Please use the Cisco best practices to achieve this. MCP1, go get those best practices. MCP2, go get maybe the actual config from some config guide. MCP3, connect to the router and actually push that config.
Maybe another data source that understands the IP address environment, or
yeah, and then maybe MCP4 run some ping tests to validate it. MCP5 put the code into GitHub. MCP6 open up a ServiceNow ticket.
And then PC7 update netbox or something.
Yeah. You're getting it. Yeah.
Feels like
Wow.
Legos.
It really is. It really is. You're just snapping things together from different providers. And over a weekend, like, I don't want anyone to be intimidated by this. This is quite easy. It actually has really democratized LLM development. You could write a fast MCP server for a random API. Here's actually what I recommend people do. Make a Python function that adds 2 numbers, just call it addition function, and then use fast MCP to advertise that as a tool. And there you go. You've just made an MCP server with a tool that can do calculations.
Yeah, but you said fast MCP. What is that? Is that a library? What is
It's a
that?
library. It's a Python framework library. It's called fast MCP. And it's literally to do fast iteration and fast development with the protocol.
So I don't know how much insight you have into this, but you mentioned MPC was developed by Anthropic, which is a for-profit company. That this is not part of a traditional standards body effort. Do you have a sense of, is this just something Anthropic is doing for the community and will continue to hold on to it? Is it going to become open source? Is it going to move into a more recognized standards body like the IETF, the IEEE, W3C, Linux Foundation, something like that?
I really don't know. I believe it is all open source, though. I think this is an open source initiative.
Okay.
Already. One thing to consider coming out of Cisco, their Outshift wing, their R&D development department, they're talking about ACP, which would be Agent Control Protocol, which would not compete with MCP. But okay, so I have this
embrace and extend.
It's actually an interesting concept. The 3 of us each make an agent, and they're using MCPs as tools. But now I want our 3 agents to communicate with each other over the internet. Now we need another bus, another protocol, another way for John's agent to talk to Ethan's agent. I don't know.
Yeah, one thing that we sort of just skated past, but there are also security issues that folks should be considering with MCP. The joke right now is that the S in MCP stands for security, because there really isn't any. I read a couple of blogs, and so there are issues like remote code injection threats, prompt poisoning threats. There's not very much authentication on, am I actually, the server that's advertising itself as server X, is it really server X? There aren't those capabilities built in. So I'm assuming at some point we might get to, like, went from HTTP to HTTPS, some kind of advancement of the standard to start bringing in more security capabilities.
I think that's a great point. I think that this is the current iteration of the protocol. Much like RIP, and RIP v1 was stateless and not secure at all. We just wanted to get packets routing. And then v2 comes along with some security and some statefulness or classlessness. So yeah, maybe an MCP v2 with some that addresses some of these shortcomings of the first protocol. I can see that. I can absolutely see that coming. The other thing is on the security point. So MCPs typically take a .env file or take in environment variables. So be very careful here. It is secure in that I know that the REST API to do, say, email is using my email token and my email account. But if I don't know who wrote the MCP, if I don't know where all the calls are going or what they're doing with those keys, you have to be very, very careful here. I am sort of trying to have a wait and see approach and wait for official MCPs to come out. There is sort of a gray market and MCP hubs emerging and a lot of MCPs on GitHub. I'm trying to hold out for an official, and let's just say Google Maps. There's probably 50 Google Maps MCP implementations out there in the wild. I'm waiting for Google, capital G, to stamp one as the official Google Maps MCP server, right?
Right, verified in the App Store.
Yeah.
Somebody you don't trust, effectively, it's a kind of phishing attack. Could be.
I would be careful. I'd be very careful.
You can play with these maybe at the outset, but you wouldn't maybe want to build a revenue generating app or an app that's touching sensitive data on top of an MCP at this point.
I don't know about that. I would be comfortable developing like a solution with it. It's more when you're connecting other MCPs to be very careful onto what you're connecting into your solution. But it's hard for people really to conceptualize it, right? But just from a command line, using natural words to do almost anything you want, right? Please do X, Y, or Z, and then tag on extra things, and then send it to Slack, and then send me an email, and then do this, then do that. It really is up to your imagination and your human limits. I found a Spotify MCP, right? So you could actually say, while I'm troubleshooting this problem, I'd like to listen to Beethoven's Ninth, right? And it just goes off and spawns Beethoven's Ninth in a browser window through Spotify, right?
Wow.
Oh boy. Okay. John, you had mentioned earlier that Selector was working on an MCP server. Why? What are you doing with it? What are the use cases? How do you imagine customers leveraging this?
Sure. So part of it is in response to demand, right? So we've actually been asked and approached if we have one and what it's going to look like. The other thing is I think it's a natural fit. We do have REST APIs that our customers, we want to position ourselves as a platform, right? So once you have that platform, if you want to consume it through our REST API, that's totally up to you. If you want to just write code and never log into our dashboard and never use the GUI, that's totally up to you, right? It's your platform. So now an MCP is just another way to come into our platform, another protocol, another way to interface with the platform.
To basically extract value from the networking data model that you guys are known for. Yeah.
Right. So then let's just say the customer I'm working closely with has an MCP for their ISP, an MCP for Netbox, an MCP for Selector in their own solution. They can start asking questions like, how is the health of circuit in Atlanta? Could you get the data, the details from Netbox and check with my ISP if there's any tickets on their end?
Is that hypothetical, or are you saying you actually have a customer doing this?
I've seen that happen. That's a real thing happening today or yesterday. I saw it actually. So the customer says, hey, I'm making great progress with your MCP. You got to see this. They ask that prompt, and the answer is, everything in Selector looks okay. Here's the information from Netbox. And as far as the ISP goes, the circuit's also healthy. In one question, imagine what that would take to do without this protocol, without this technology, right?
They ask that via chat ops like Slack or something?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. It does feel like we're living in the future because
it's VibeOps. I'm telling you, VibeOps is here.
So back in the day, it was like, if you wanted something like that, we'd all dream about this. I don't want to sit and parse through my NMS and try to dig out the thing and figure all this out and build dependency trees. And you had to have a deep expert level understanding of your network to even build something that could represent data in that way to you. It all depended on expert network engineer knowledge. What we've moved to now is beyond that, especially as networks have gotten more complex. It's way too hard to keep it all in your head anyway. So now you can throw all of this data into a model, and now you can ask natural questions through other tooling that you already use. And if you've trained it correctly on the right sort of data, get accurate answers back that are actionable that you can do something with, saving yourself like digging. So the way you just described this, hey, I need to know about this specific circuit in this context and what's going on. As what would I have done before? Log into this, check this, maybe check this other tool, maybe look at some log entries, and then kind of piece together entry by entry what's actually going on until finally I see the thing and go, oh, that's what's wrong, or whatever it is. Yeah.
Right. Or I eliminate my side and then I got to dig up the circuit ID, the 800 number for my provider, call the
Yeah.
provider, clear it on their end. And that was the amazing thing. I said, so how long would that, 5 years ago when you actually had to phone your ISP with a circuit number, that like now you're literally just saying, oh, and check the ISP circuit on their end through their API, right?
Mm. Oh, it's okay. Okay. Something else just popped in my head. A ticket comes in, help desk gets it. They go, networking problem, punt, and they send it over to the network engineering team or the ops team, as however you organized. And then they look at it and go, oh, okay. And then you got to head back over to maybe whoever asked the question. Well, what do you experience? Qualify. You need to go through all this stuff. Instead, help desk ticket comes in, help desk team sits, triage the frontline folks, ask a question via natural language. Hey, this ticket just came in. Or, ooh, hey, look at this ticket. What do you think? And maybe you get back an authoritative answer as to exactly what the problem is. That feels possible now.
What if we go a step further and the ticket comes in and we just take the contents of the ticket and punt that to the LLM right away? Why do we need the frontline help desk to look at this, Ethan?
All depending on who's got to
Right?
fix
So
the
ticket
problem, the
comes
nature of the
in,
problem.
send it to the LLM. LLM grabs the right tools, gets the right data, and goes right back to that user and says, actually, you're right. We did notice a problem in the circuit. The right teams have been notified. Thank you for opening up your ticket, right?
Or if you, depending on the data set that you're working with, it's your Wi-Fi. You need to go wherever we see that you're, we detected you're at a Starbucks in Atlanta
Right.
where the Wi-Fi is awful. You need to go somewhere else and your signal will improve.
I like this game because I'm thinking to mine when the ticket comes in, what if the AI finds that it is a problem and then kicks off the automation to correct the problem and goes back and says to the user, thank you for pointing out this problem. We've addressed it. Could you try it again, right?
I mean, that goes back to the part of our conversation about trust, right?
A closed loop and trust. Yes, that's right.
That's always been the thing. Do I turn the automation loose
I
on the
know.
mediation of the problem?
But I hope that there's some time capsule and in 50 or 75 years, the people then look back and laugh and go, oh, look how scared they were of this MCP protocol back in 2025. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, ha ha ha. The difference being no one in 50 or 75 years is going to have any idea how any of this works except the LLMs that
That's
we
right.
trained now.
That's right. That's right. Well, I am very fortunate to be where I am and to get to do what I do. And I want to thank both of you for having me here. I find that packet pushers are generally speaking risk takers, in that not everybody wants to hear about this stuff, and it is a new thing, and there's a lot of hype around it. But I appreciate these. I think conversations like this actually kind of get through the sizzle and into the steak, right?
Yeah,
I hope so.
But people want to dig into some selector steak. Where should they go, John?
We are working on hopefully on having a sandbox up soon. So when you click on the request a demo, we hopefully are having an interactive sandbox environment on the horizon. Don't hold me to that, but we're working on it in the roadmap. If you're interested in generally speaking in MCPs, keep an eye on our LinkedIn, keep an eye on my YouTube, and beyond that, we are going to have a very big public presence this year. So we're going to be at a lot of events. Cisco Live, we're going to be at ONUG, we're going to be at HP, a lot of events. We're really trying to establish ourselves and get our name out there. And Packet Pushers has really been a big supporter of us. So thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for coming by, John, and chatting with us today. And thanks to Selector for being a sponsor. So you've heard Selector before on the show, Selector.ai. And again, we deal with a lot of startups here. Drew and I talked to, I can't tell you how many in the course of a year. Some of them are, oh, you have an interesting idea. And then some of them are like, Okay, things are changing now, and
Okay.
Selector.ai is one of those companies where things are changing now. So if you've been doing SNMP, network monitoring and kind of routine observability for forever, and you're looking for a different way to make sense of all the data that you've got, Selector AI is one of those companies where sense is being made of telemetry in ways that you've never heard of before. It's really intriguing and interesting what these guys are doing. Anyway, thank you for listening to Heavy Networking today. And again, very special thanks to Selector for being a sponsor. And I know that a bunch of you reached out to Selector the last time they were on. So if you do that this round, please tell them that you heard about them on Packet Pushers. And we thank you for that. Because when our sponsors, like Selector, know you're interested in them, then they're interested in us. And that keeps the lights on. That's a thing that matters to us. Okay, please do all the things. They really do matter to us as well. Leave a comment on Spotify, for example, or Apple Podcasts. You could subscribe really everywhere that you're listening. We would appreciate that. That includes YouTube. All our shows are going up on YouTube now. And get yourself on Human Infrastructure and Packet Capture newsletters. You could buy some merch. We'd appreciate that. Store.packetpushers.net. And don't sleep on the header. At the top, it says podcast collection. So if you want show merch, swag that's just for heavy networking or one of our many other shows, click on that. We got a whole bunch of collections under that. That's kind of quietly hidden in the header. We got to fix that. We really do. Anyway, if you got questions or comments about this, packetpushers.net/follow up, and we'll field your questions as best we can, share your comments with John, and so on. And last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.